Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bite Size Balance. I'm your host, Wendy McCallum, and I'm really excited to be here today with Bonita Grobbelaar. Bonita is coming to us from South Africa, which is very exciting. You're my first guest on the podcast, Bonita, from that continent. So welcome.
Thank you. That is exciting.
It is very exciting. This podcast has suddenly become international. So we've got Bonita here today. Bonita has a really neat job. She is also a coach, but she coaches a very similar demographic to the client base that I work with. She coaches in a different area, but what we have discovered is that there is a lot of overlap in terms of what we do and how we coach and just generally our philosophy around personal growth for women. So Bonita is the CEO of the Global Center for Healthy Relationships, and she is a conscious relationship coach. So before we get going, Bonita, you're going to have to tell people what that's all about, because I don't think people are going to know from that description. So tell us what you do.
So I help women to make more conscious relationship decisions, right? Because basically when we build relationships, whether they are love relationships or social relationships, friendships, or even work relationships, we form relationships based on patterning from childhood. Right. And there isn't necessarily a problem with that unless our childhood caregivers weren't exactly great relationship models for us. So I just help women to sort of step out of themselves and take a step back and look at, why are my love relationships failing? Who's the common denominator in there usually? And then help them to heal the patterning, the past, the blueprints, and step into an entirely new way of approaching relationships, so that they can form healthy, lasting, loving relationships. So, I've been doing that for about 12 years, but my business is stepping into a completely new phase where I see that the work that I do with women, it doesn't just change their love relationships, it changes every other area as well, even your relationship with money. And I feel there's a call. So I've started this movement of, women who cultivate the art of healthy relationship forming, and in that show others what that looks like, because that's how we learn. There isn't a school that's learning us about this, right? There are some coaches out there, but it's really about, we're in trouble as a society because we're more and more connected technologically, but we're less and less connected emotionally. And to see that healthy relationships, healthy bonding is becoming, a thing of the past. And I'm worried about that.
Yeah, I hear you. It's we've been talking a lot actually about connection, mostly between women. So less about romantic relationships on the podcast lately, but more about the need, the kind of deep inherent need that women have for connection and what happens when it's not there for us. And of course, right now during this pandemic, it's a really tough time for connection. A lot of people are feeling really isolated, the role of women's connection and community between women in the sphere that I work in, which is largely burnout and also unhealthy coping mechanisms and addictions, is just so critical. It's just so important for women to be able to share with honesty the struggles that they're having with people that they trust, with other women that they trust. And so I think today we're going to be talking about a really cool topic. So we kind of brainstormed to come up with a topic that we thought would be really interesting for all of you listeners. So we're going to talk a little bit about romantic relationships, but just generally, we're going to talk about the role of learning how to ask for help when it comes to preventing burnout. I mean, one of the things that I see with many of the successful women that I work with in my one-on-one coaching practice, and also the women that I work with around changing their relationship with alcohol, is that they have a resistance to asking for help. So they've kind of fallen into this default place where they want to do it all, or they feel like they have to do it all. And they're not very good at asking for help. And that's a contributing factor to that burnout, and which, of course, is largely related to their reliance on unhealthy coping mechanisms like food and alcohol. So I think this conversation is going to be really interesting today. What we're going to talk about is the sweet spot between doing it all and asking for help. So let's start, Bonita, with talking about maybe why do we as women always want to do it ourselves? What do you think is up with that?
It's definitely got to do with comparing ourselves to others, right? And being in this day and age where we know what someone else is eating for breakfast, right? And what someone else is doing with their family. And there's this continual comparing of self with others because of social media and the role that it plays. So I think that's a big one. And I think that it has many consequences for us, for our psychological health, because we're not comparing ourselves to models and movie stars anymore. We're comparing ourselves to people that are moms like us, or career women like us, friends, family, people in our network that are only projecting, a certain picture of what's going on. Like I was saying the other day to a colleague, I posted a picture of me and my daughter because we were away for my birthday party. And then, we came back. We were away for my birthday, not a party, because I'm in my 40s and my daughter is 5, so we wouldn't have had a party. But we went away, we went camping, and we came back and I had a stomach bug, right? And I was lying in bed and I posted this beautiful picture, and a colleague of mine said, "Oh, happy birthday, by the way." And I knew she was referring to that picture. And I said, no, my birthday was 2 days ago. I'm lying in bed with a stomach bug, but you don't post that on Facebook, right?
Well, it's true, right? And so this is what we refer to as the share and compare culture, and it's really destroying women's psyches. And I have been on the bandwagon for trying to, break this down and get real about what's really happening on social media now for a long time. Because of course, yes, we are comparing ourselves now to women we feel like, and I'm putting this in air quotes, are just like us, and not celebrities. But the truth is, those are highly curated feeds using filters and taking only snapshots of the highlights of that person's life. And we have no idea actually how much help that person has had. And a lot of these people actually have photographers taking the photos for them, especially these influencers. And, it feels like they're just like us, but they're actually not like us at all. And so, I agree. I think that's a big piece of it. And so we feel like they're doing it all themselves. And so we should be able to do it all ourselves too. The truth is they're probably not doing it all themselves. And even if they are doing it all themselves, their life does not look like that most of the time, whatever it is that they're showing us, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about too in relation to this is that, when we think back in history, we really started out working as a true tribe where we were all helping each other. It was unusual that women were living in households by themselves, having to take care of everything in that household with no one else to rely on. Help was just kind of the norm. Getting help was just the way society worked. Everybody was helping everybody else. We were raising each other's children. We were, supporting each other's aging relatives. All of this was being done in a more communal way. And there are lots of great things about modern society and the progress that we've made as a civilization. But I think one of the downsides to that is that we have become more isolated, and single family households are now really the norm in many cultures. Certainly they are here in North America. And the result of that is that there just is no obvious help around. So we just got accustomed to doing it all ourselves. It's just the way we were raised, many of us. I was raised in a household where my mom did it all. And my dad worked a very traditional household for a long time. And so that was the role modeling that I had. The other little piece I think that's interesting that flows into this, and you and I think you're a little younger than me, but we're in kind of the same age bracket. I'm a Gen Xer. There aren't that many of us, but we were raised at a time where women were just starting to come into their own. So feminism was a thing. You know, I was born in 1971, and so feminism was a thing. And in the 80s, we were all told as girls, you can do it all. You can do everything. You can do all of the things, which was great. It was a great sentiment. But the problem was none of the societal structures were in place. By the time that Gen X crew, the girls of the Gen X generation, got out into the workforce, we technically could. So I was able to go to law school as a woman. I was able to get a job in a really, great firm and work my way up through that firm to become a partner. But unfortunately, there were no structures in society to help me have it all. The men were still not doing half of the work in terms of the domestic labor and the emotional labor involved in running a family. So, we're in this situation where we're trying to do it all, and we've been told we can do it all, and we can do it all alone. Nobody said to me, you can do it all as long as you have enough help. I was just told, you can do it. Whatever you want to do, you can do it. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, great. I can do it. I can have this amazing career. I can have this great family. I can have a great marriage and relationship. I can do all of these things, and I can do them on my own. And the truth is, it's pretty much impossible. And I think it's getting better. I hope. You have a daughter. I have a daughter. I hope it's getting better for women. But I think we were sold a bit of a false bill of goods, a lot of us, that we were going to be able to do all of the things that men did. But what we didn't kind of factor into that was that men were not being told, you can do all the things that women do, right? So it didn't quite balance out. I have hope it's going to balance out, but I think this must be contributing to this feeling that we have that we need to do it all.
I so agree with you. So I'm also in the Generation X, right? And my mother is very young. I mean, she had me when she was 18. And I remember, she was this corporate career woman, and she'd taken the world by storm. But coming home at night and having to cook and take care of the kids, right? And Dad also being super successful, but coming home at night and not cooking and not taking care of the kids, right?
Right.
So because of that, I was very adamant. I mean, I remember my grandmother telling me, you're not going to find a husband because you don't cook, right? And I remember because of that whole scenario being very adamant that I don't cook.
Right.
My life is very different. Like, I have an amazing husband who's an amazing father to our kids, and he's the cook in the family. He's taken over that role because I simply don't, and I proved my grandmother wrong. But I must say, we're going through a phase where my business is taking off, and we've decided to move to the coast, and financially, I'm starting to become more of a provider than he used to be traditionally, and that creates a very different dynamic for women and men. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because you said, men aren't necessarily doing what women do. Like, he's trying, but it's like they're not equipped. It's like, if there's a blanket that's been folded up and it's been put somewhere, like he'd fold it up and put it somewhere, and I'd look at that and it would stay there for 3 weeks. And I'd eventually say to him, did you see this blanket, right? Take it out the cupboard. Do you not know that it's got a space? And his saying is, well, I don't know that you want it packed away, right? Or I don't know that it needs to be done this way. So maybe I'm making excuses for him, but it's sort of like they're not inclined that way at all.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think that's the biggest problem. So what do we do? Who do we get to do it if we don't do it?
Yeah, that's absolutely right too. I think it's getting better too. I'm lucky. I am married. I've been married for almost 20 years this year to a very, very helpful husband who does an awful lot of stuff and is a fantastic father. But, and at different times in our careers, one of us has been the primary breadwinner. It's gone back and forth.
Yes.
And so I know what that feels like too, to be the primary breadwinner. And, it does it does shift the dynamic for sure. But I just think we are programmed to do it all. I think it's the way it's the way we've been raised. It's what we see happening out there. And I think that we have been told that that's good. So it is a desirable thing to be the person who does it all and does it all really well, which leads us right into, I think, a discussion around perfectionism, because I think these two things are tied very closely together. This idea of being able to do it all really well and being a perfectionist, which is something I hear. I don't know about you, but I hear this as a self descriptor all the time in my coaching practice. Women who are the clients I work with are highly successful women who on paper, their lives are amazing. So they've got everything that they were working for. But they feel like something's missing. They're just not happy. And those women will regularly self-identify as perfectionists. Is that something that you hear as well?
Definitely. And that's why they're so successful, right? Because they've got this little voice, telling them that they have to do more. They have to work harder, right? It's some sort of, some version of not being enough, right? Yeah. And having to live up to everyone else's standard.
Yeah.
Is really at the core. And I mean, perfectionism is exhausting. That's what leads to burnout. And it's impossible to reach perfectionism. And then that goes right back down to the shame experience because I'm not perfect, right? Which leads to the over drinking, overeating, overindulging and whatever, because shame is a terrible emotion to be dealing with. And it's, again, like we said in the beginning, we need that sense of community so that we can talk about it, so that we can share about it, so that we can release the hold that shame has on us.
Yeah, absolutely. We have talked a fair bit about shame on this podcast, and I want to talk about shame as much as possible because it's the most limiting emotion out there. It is an emotion that when we feel it, shame by its very definition is the holding of a secret. It's something that you're not talking to other people about. And as Brene Brown says, shame can only exist under a rock. So it flourishes when it's kept in the dark. It just grows and grows and grows when we don't share it and we don't bring it out to the light of day. But as soon as we lift the rock and let the sunlight shine on it, AKA have a conversation with someone else about it, it starts to lose its power. But it is such a crippling emotion. It keeps so many women stuck. And I love the connection that you've drawn between perfectionism and shame, because I think the very ideal or standard of perfectionism is by its very definition impossible to achieve. It's impossible to achieve. When I say to women, say to me, well, I'm a perfectionist. And I say, okay, well, how's that working out for you first? And the answer is usually not great. And then the second thing I say is, how are you doing at that? Like, how good are you at being perfect? So let's take a real life example of something you're working on right now that you feel like you need to do a perfect job. What does perfection look like in that task for you? And they can't define it because you don't know, because it can always be better. So it's impossible to reach that standard of perfection. And so one of the things I do with all the women I work with whom it becomes clear to me that this is a limiting belief that they have about their self, because we think it's an empowering belief. We think it's a positive characteristic to call ourselves perfectionists, but it's one of the biggest limiting beliefs out there in terms of us actually, I think, achieving our potential and growing as human beings, because what it does is it makes it impossible for us to ever succeed, which is just the biggest blow to our confidence, right? And it leads, of course, it also leads, I think, I don't know if you have had this experience around this and if you agree with me on this, but in my experience, it also leads to women playing small. So I actually don't know if I agree that the really successful women that I work with, the ones who are at this maxing, I don't know whether they're perfectionists. I don't think they are. I think they like to call themselves perfectionists, but I'm not sure they actually are. I think people who actually really identify with that find themselves stuck. They actually are not able to do the things that they want to do because they are so afraid that they're going to fail. because they can't achieve the standard of perfectionism. And so they play small with it, or they just don't complete it, or they make excuses or whatever, but it never really gets done. That's been my experience. It's the biggest excuse for procrastination, perfectionism.
Yes, definitely. I think it has many outcomes. What drives people to strive for perfectionism, right, is a feeling of not, from my experience, it's a feeling of not being enough.
Yeah.
Just being, right? Just being like me here right now. Not enough, not enough. So that's why I'm always working so hard. And I identify with that because that's who I am, or who I used to be, right? So I was like constantly doing, being, working, proving. And I find women do that in relationships as well, like proving their worth, showing like what a great girlfriend I can be, right? Doing that, going the extra mile, putting in extra hours, like being the doormat, like working, being really hard to be enough.
Yeah.
That's the one end of the coin. And definitely on the other end of the coin, people who don't even get up, right? Because it feels too scary.
Yeah. Or they do things, but they just don't, they never, so they do things that are easy. They do things that they know they can succeed at. They do, and those easy, they might be easy for them and not easy for other people. So it still might look like they're very successful, but they are not in any way challenging themselves and reaching their full potential because they're playing it safe. So I would say, yeah, for many, many years when I was practicing law, I would consider myself a perfectionist, but I wasn't taking a lot of risks, and I was doing very well objectively. And again, my life looked fantastic on paper. I was succeeding, from an objective perspective, I was succeeding, but I wasn't doing anything that scared me. And I was, again, doing well because I was afraid to fail, right? I was reading this really interesting quote from Brene Brown. I think it was an article in Forbes. And I just excerpted it. Oh boy, I can't say that word today. I excerpted it. So because I thought it would tie in really nicely with what we're talking about. So she's talking about perfectionism versus self-improvement. So the ability to grow versus perfectionism. And she says, perfectionism is at its core about trying to earn approval. Most perfectionists grew up being praised for achievement and performance, grades, manners, rule following, people pleasing, appearance, sports. Somewhere along the way, they adopted this dangerous and debilitating belief system. I am what I accomplish and how well I accomplish it. Please perform, perfect. On the other hand, healthy striving is self-focused. How can I improve? Perfectionism is other-focused. What will they think, right? That's the difference. Perfectionism is all about what other people will think. And so she says perfectionism is a hustle. And then she talks about how, and this was my favorite part of the article, she talks about how we're all sick of the hustle. We're sick of trying to do it ourselves, but we're also sick of watching other people hold themselves up as perfect. And what we're really looking for in other people, especially I think in other women, is we're looking for women who are willing to admit that they're not perfect, who are willing to admit that they struggle with things. And this is really where, vulnerability comes in. And I want to talk a little bit about this with you because I also see, I see the striving for perfectionism and the fear of being vulnerable as the two things that hold women back the most.
Yes. So, it's so hard to speak on vulnerability because I think Brene Brown owns that word.
She really does. Yeah.
So, and all the work that I teach is really based on her teachings because she's just amazing at that. But definitely, the reason why we don't ask for help, why we do strive for perfectionism is because we're afraid of letting people see the real us, right? And we're afraid that, it's sort of like it's a weakness. If I have to ask for help, I'm weak, and we don't like being weak because we've spent decades of proving that we're strong, as strong as men. And, as Brene Brown so aptly put it, vulnerability isn't weakness. It's complete courage to be who you really are in the moment, right there. So when you are this sort of take charge person and, doing everything yourself and you feel like you need help, why does asking for help feel so scary?
Yeah. But because we still see it as a sign of weakness. Again, a really limiting belief, everybody, because the truth is, and this is really what Bonita and I want to get into, I think today, is that the truth is that the most meaningful relationships are all built on vulnerability. This is where all the growth happens. This is where all the human connection happens. This is why you hear me on this podcast talking about things that are like incredibly personal to me, things that for a very long time I would never have shared in public. I mean, I have talked about menopause. I have talked about, I don't know whether this episode will have aired or not yet, but there will be an episode where I talk about my, struggles with trying to have a family and the many pregnancies that I lost. There will be a podcast episode with my sister, which may or may not have aired yet, where we talk about taking care of my father in the last year before he died. And the reason I do these podcasts is because, first of all, I don't have any shame about these things anymore. So none of these things where I felt like I needed to ask for help or that were really difficult or challenging for me feel like shame promoting events to me anymore. Instead, they feel like opportunities to connect and actually get stronger, because in my experience, that's really what's helped me to heal from all of these things, is finding other women who have been through the same thing that I've been through. I have talked about my reliance on alcohol and the struggle that I had to change my relationship with wine. And the reason I will keep doing all of these things is because me showing some vulnerability to you is what allows you to see me as a real, live human being. Not remotely perfect, incredibly flawed, but also very committed to growing and to serving other people and to creating stronger connections. And I think that, this is really what we have to start thinking about as women. We have to start thinking about the fact that this thing that we see as a weakness is actually a superpower. I think it's the thing that makes us better workers. I think it makes us better business people. I think it makes us better leaders. I think it makes us better parents. I think it makes us better. And I want to know what you think about this, because I know nothing about love relations. I mean, I'm married. That's about all I know. I have
Well, married for 20 years means you know a lot, right?
Yes, but please do not come for me for coaching around your romantic relationships. That is not my wheelhouse, but it is Bonita's. And I have to believe, Bonita, that there's a real connection here between being able to be vulnerable and ask for help and, getting better at doing that, and your ability to create lasting relationships and partnerships.
Definitely, because when we show up in a relationship being completely perfect, right? That perfectionism thing, not needing help. I call it a vulnerability shield, right? The other person is bumping up against this vulnerability shield, and they can't connect with you at a heart level because they cannot see the real you. When we let that shield down, right, and we show that I'm imperfect and I'm okay with that, and I actually accept myself that way, I create a safe space for him to be imperfect too.
Right.
And that's where you connect. And that's where communication and emotion sort of freely flows, because now it's a safe place where I can be me and you can be you, and we connect at a heart level. I mean, there's no other way to say it. I think it's such a powerful way to say it, but I've said it so many times. And the more we connect, the deeper that level of vulnerability becomes. Like, I'm not saying at a first date, you're that vulnerable. Brene Brown also says it's like, this jar of marbles that you fill up. Like, vulnerability isn't something that, the depth and the level of vulnerability isn't something that happens overnight. It happens as you get to know someone, as you get to trust them. But what I see with my clients is when we've really been hurt or we've been let down, we shut people out and we go, I can only rely on me. That's why I don't ask for help, right? That's why I do everything myself because others let me down.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we really need to start breaking down those barriers and go looking at those beliefs. Is that true? Is it true that you really can only rely on yourself, right? What is that doing to you? And usually it's leading to exhaustion because women were not designed to be doing everything by themselves. Yes, we can, and we've proven that we can, but it's not a happy existence.
Right. It comes at a big cost. Big cost. The cost is burnout. And it's such an important time to be talking about that cost because we know that burnout rates are significantly on the rise as a result of this pandemic. And there are all kinds of complicating factors that are making that the case. Women are now working third shifts in this pandemic. Not only are we dealing with our, the first shift of our career, and then the second shift of, taking care of kids in the evening. But many of us are now also responsible for schoolwork with our kids, making sure our kids are staying on track with their education, maybe even homeschooling, depending on where we live during lockdowns. And all of the additional emotional labor that is involved in managing other people during this pandemic. So just managing my two teenagers during this pandemic is a lot. And my husband is absolutely participating in that. I don't want him to hear this and think I'm dissing him on this. He's very good at that, but everybody needs extra support right now. And a lot of that naturally falls on the mother. It just does. So, we're in this state right now where burnout is so high. I'm seeing it in incredible numbers right now. And so I think it's really important for us to be having this conversation around asking for help and how that is not, in fact, a sign of weakness, but it's a way for you to actually demonstrate vulnerability, take some of this load off of your shoulders, prevent burnout, and in the process of that, create more meaningful relationships because you're actually letting people know that you need help. And it's actually interesting. I was thinking as we were chatting here, how this ties into the corporate wellness work that I do. So I'm regularly speaking to large groups of people working for corporations, employee groups and executive groups. And, one of the things that almost always comes up when I'm speaking to higher level managers and executives is the importance of role modeling effectively vulnerability around wellness. So being able to be the leader who says, I'm struggling. This is really hard, especially right now, this pandemic, it's really hard. I've fallen out of my old wellness patterns. All of the healthy habits many of the healthy habits that I had in place before this pandemic have become so difficult for me to keep in place. I'm exhausted. I'm feeling burnt out. And then equally importantly, saying, so here's what I'm doing. I'm taking an hour every day to take care of myself. And that involves me, whatever it is. It could be a variety of different things that classifies self-care for that person. But the importance of being able to be vulnerable as a leader in a company or as a manager of other people is really, really important too. So I just think that vulnerability is the key to creating stronger relationships in all aspects of your life. Your career, your romantic relationships, your friendships, your parenting relationships, and just other family relationships. I think it's really important. I feel like I got totally off topic there, but that's okay. That's what this podcast is all about. I always do.
And it was important to highlight, definitely.
Yeah.
I thought of something while you were saying that I really wanted to highlight is, the opposite of vulnerability. And I'm not sure if Brene Brown would back me on this, but the opposite of vulnerability is isolation, right? Not being connected. And, for me, that's the new pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Is because of everything that's happened. So vulnerability is also something that's happening increasingly less. And, even when as women, we're taking on second and third shifts and we're homeschooling, where's the time for connection? Which is what we thrive on, which is how we fill our cups.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's such a good point. And this is one of the reasons why this year I ended up creating a community, I have a very small coaching group that I run, and I will set up another one if I have enough people for another small coaching group, because the thing that was missing for my clients who I've been supporting all year on a one-on-one private coaching basis was they were missing the community and the connection. And they were finding that even more difficult to find during the pandemic. And, I think in particular, when you're struggling with something, connection is key, as we talked about earlier. So if we're talking about this small group, they're all women who are trying to change their relationship with alcohol. It's so important to know that you're not alone, right?
Yes.
Yes. If you're isolated, you're feeling alone. That's exactly what's happening. So
I must tell you, I had my group program as well during this pandemic. I had a lady based in the UK, and we know they've been really hard hit, right?
Yeah.
France. And I was working with them over a period from last year, October, up until now. And it was that time where they were in isolation over Christmas, over New Year, over a birthday, right? And it's a single woman alone in her flat. And I could every week just see how the life is being drained out of that woman, both of them, out of their lives. And it was like a struggle to keep them connected and keep them going, because I couldn't imagine what that must have been like, for 2-3 months by yourself. And it just really proved to me how important it is for us to build healthy relationships, meaning relationships, because that woman should have had friends or a community, even if she doesn't have, a boyfriend or a husband. She should be having friends or community or family that she can be vulnerable enough with to say, I need help.
Right.
Like I need someone to be there for me. I'm feeling alone.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and the piece that I want to add to this is it's not too late. So if you are feeling isolated, if you are feeling like, and I've talked about this before on the podcast. I actually had a woman on, April McKinnon, quite a few episodes ago, but we talked about the importance of connection and community for women. That was the whole topic of the podcast. And, we talked about how as you age, usually your circle starts to shrink. So it grows in adolescence and in university. You've got, everybody, you're out and about all the time. You're not tied down. You don't have any responsibilities yet. When you have children, it shrinks again, but then it grows again often with your children's friends' parents. Your circle grows. Then as your children become teenagers, you no longer see their friends' parents. It's just not part of it anymore. And it shrinks again. And that's certainly been the pattern for me in my 40s. My circle really started to shrink a lot. And so much so that I've had conversations with some of my really good friends about it. Like, I need more friends. I need to grow my circle again because I don't feel like I have enough connection. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, again, well, first of all, this is me being vulnerable. So there was a time where I was really worried about the fact that my circle felt like it was shrinking, and I was starting to feel isolated in terms of my really tight, and my relationships with women are very important to me, very important to me. And so when that circle started to shrink, I started to get worried about that. But with work, it is growing again. So it takes effort. It's like everything else. The first piece of it is always awareness. Awareness is always really uncomfortable. It never feels great to realize, ooh, this thing is not quite the way I want it to be. And I probably played a role in that. This is my responsibility where I am right now. How can I change this? Is the next step. And you'll never get to how can I change this if you don't have that awareness first, right? So it is possible to do this. And it's also possible to do this during the pandemic. So, we just entered into another 30-day lockdown today where I am. So we are back in lockdown here. We can have 5 people total at a gathering. We are a family of 4, which means we can have 1 person in our house other than the 4 of us maximum. So we're back in that place where it's difficult. We will not be gathering in groups anymore. I know there are lots of women listening to this podcast who are in the same boat. It is not impossible to create meaningful connection during this pandemic. It's absolutely available for you. The key, though, is you have to find a place where people are being vulnerable. You have to,
Yes.
first of all, you have to become vulnerable. You have to say, I need this. That step in itself, right? You have to ask for help. I don't have enough connection right now, which is where I found myself a few years ago. I don't have it. You have to ask for help, and then you have to get vulnerable, and you have to get into a community, and you have to be willing to share something that matters to you, something that matters to you. Because if you get into a group and it's a book club or it's a wine club or whatever, and all the ladies are on there and they're all just talking about how great their lives are, you're not going to establish any meaningful connection. You're not going to get anything back from that. Again, I like the jar of marbles idea. Like, you don't want to dump the whole jar in the first 5 minutes. You want to start slow with this. And you need to be, another thing that I talk about a lot is this idea of sharing from your scars and not from your wounds, right? So I think there's a place to share from your wounds, and that's probably therapy or with somebody who's very, very safe and trusted. But when we're talking about scars, we're talking about wounds that have healed over a little bit, that you feel comfortable talking about. It still might feel scary. It still feels vulnerable, but they're not open, raw wounds right now, right? So I think bear that in mind as well when you're starting to share. But this little group that I've got going, and I'm sure it's the case with your groups as well, Bonita, it's an incredible group. They are so supportive of each other. It's been a game changer for many of my clients who were, up until the last couple of months, kind of on their own, just with me in all of this. And now they're feeling like they're part of a community. You do a lot of group coaching around love relationships?
Yes, definitely, because we heal relationship issues through relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And we cannot learn to be vulnerable by ourselves, right? So
right.
I find that the group is a key strength of the process, because we need to practice being seen. We need to practice asking for help in a safe place where there's absolutely no judgment, so that my brain can process that fear, fight, or flight response, right, in the safe place. And what I find what women do when they resist being vulnerable, and then they eventually do it, and then they realize, okay, no, it wasn't that bad. And what we realize in each of us taking turns to share is that when I'm being vulnerable, I'm super overcritical of myself, right?
Yeah.
When someone else is being vulnerable, I like them more.
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
And I connect with them more. So, and that's really powerful to learn in that group environment, so that you can do that when you're in a relationship or at work. And so we practice vulnerability in the group. Yes.
Yeah, I love that. What did you say? I loved what you said. You said something like, we need relationships to heal relationships.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we heal relationship issues through relationships.
Yeah. I love that. That's so true. Such a great way to put it. So, okay, let's go back to this whole idea of like not asking for help, which is where we started. We've gone off on a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's all related. So we talked about how it's, one of the reasons why women are finding themselves overwhelmed and burnt out and just at the end of their proverbial rope is because they are trying to do everything themselves. We talked about how part of that is because we think that that's good and that's how we should be. And we associate that with, I don't know what, I guess being successful and independent somehow, but how that's kind of a sham. And now we've talked a little bit about how in order to ask for help, that necessarily involves some vulnerability for most women, but that's actually a good thing. And vulnerability is key to so many other pieces of our fulfillment as human beings. And also just kind of key, I think, to the core of being female for a lot of us. Like, women really need connection and community. It's really, really important to us. So now I think we're at the point where the question becomes, how do we start asking for help? Like, how do we actually roll this out practically? How does this work for us? If there's somebody listening to this podcast and they're thinking, oh, that's me. I never ask for help. I'm trying to do everything myself. I feel like I'm underwater right now. I know I can't sustain this for much longer. Do you have any ideas around how we can start doing this when it's not our default to do so?
I think what's really important is to start small, right? So it doesn't feel too big, and to start, small, number one. And number two is, ask people who you really trust. And, if there's no one around you that you trust, then that's something else that we need to work on, right? Because,
Right.
vulnerability and trust go hand in hand. So start small, start, asking for small favors, start reaching out, maybe start at work and say, I'm really struggling with X, Y, and Z. Is it possible for you to explain this to me?
Mm-hmm.
And, just push yourself to do it. And guess what? You won't die. Like, I know
Yeah,
it feels hard.
that's right.
And, the more we do it, the more we'll realize that people actually connect with us and people like being of help and of service. As long as it's not, won't you sort of drive me 4 hours here and 4 hours back on your off Saturday, right? We mustn't take from people in a way that devalues their worth and their time.
Yeah.
But people would love to help out and to assist. Like I know, I love being of assistance and knowing that I'm making someone else's life better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And I think too, the other piece of it, which we haven't really talked about that much, is that there's something kind of arrogant about this perfectionist standard. I've said this before, and I'm not judging because I used to call myself this. This is a word I would have used for myself in the past. I purposefully do not use it anymore, ever. Because what I realized along the way was there's kind of an arrogance in that, which is I can do this better than everyone else. So, when we're not asking for help, sometimes what we're saying, and we may not be saying it out loud, but I think we're communicating this message sometimes. We communicate it to our employees, we communicate it to our children, we communicate it to our partners. Sometimes the message that we're sending is, you can't do this as well as me. So I have to do this. I'm not asking for your help because I know you won't be able to do this as well as I can do it. And I totally suffered from that for a very long time, where I just had this belief I could do things better and more efficiently than everybody else. And you know what? Sometimes I can, Bonita. So there are some things that I am better at than my partner, Rob, or than my teenagers. But a couple of things on that. How are my kids ever going to learn to do it better if I don't let them do it themselves is part of it. Mm-hmm. So this is a really simple place to start asking for help. Start asking your kids for help. And the piece that goes along with this that I think is the most just the most beautiful little gift in all of this is that your kids absolutely love it. They love nothing more than when you tell them that you have failed. So when you get vulnerable with your kids and you say, you know what, I screwed up. And you say, I realize I have been doing all of this stuff myself because I've been making this arrogant assumption that I can do it better than all of you guys. And you know what? Maybe I can do some of this stuff better than all of you guys. But the reason why that might be true is because I never let you practice. I never give you a shot at practice. And in my experience, this works so well with kids, just letting them know that you have messed up, that because I think it's important for our kids to also appreciate, if we want to break this cycle for the next generation of women, we need to show our girls that it's actually really okay and great to be vulnerable. And that this is really something that they should aspire to be open with their feelings and to allow themselves to be vulnerable and to admit that they can't do it all and to ask for help. We need to role model this to our girls. Because I don't think that was role modeled that much to me. But at the same time, again, I was in that generation where my mom was not doing it all yet. So I was in this kind of transition generation. When I was 13, my mom went to university and got a degree, and then she started working. But for my childhood years, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. So she was maybe had a little more time to do it. She still couldn't do it all. Nobody can, but she wasn't asking for help as much. I don't think this was role modeled for me, and that's not her fault. It's just the way it was. But I do think now that we understand this and we are paying the price of trying to do it all, that it's kind of on our shoulders as, this generation of mothers now to actually role model this for our kids as well. And the extra bonus in it is that you won't have to do it all because they'll start helping. So, it's kind of a win-win. It serves us, but I think it also serves them. So I guess the biggest fear that we have when it comes to asking for help and being vulnerable is that we get rejected somehow, or someone mocks us or makes fun of us, or I guess that's the reason why we don't do it, is that somehow it's going to reflect badly on us. So what do we do if we get rejected? Because it happens sometimes. What do we do with that?
I think we need to reframe rejection, right? Because when we're being vulnerable and asking for help, we're being courageous enough to say, I can't do this, I need help. And if someone says, well, I can't help you, that doesn't reflect on me as a person and on my worth, right?
Yeah.
If someone can't help you, they can't help you. And then it's up to you to keep on asking, somewhere else until you do find the help that you need. But definitely rejection needs to be reframed because it has absolutely no connection to our worth. I always say to my clients when we enter the dating phase, like, you're going to get really good at rejection. Like, I want you to be rejected at least 3 times a week so that you can just get over yourself, right? Because not everyone is going to be your cup of tea, and you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. And if you're not being rejected at least a couple of times a week, that means you're not moving out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Yeah. Yeah.
Reframe it.
Yeah. Well, it definitely does. I mean, being vulnerable, that really is all about stepping outside your comfort zone and taking a bit of a risk. And, as Brene Brown says, that quote that she constantly quotes, which I love, about getting into the arena, you have to get into the arena. You can't be the person passing judgment on other people if you're not willing to get down and dirty yourself and actually get vulnerable yourself. And so, on this, I guess, just to kind of summarize or just bring it all kind of back here in terms of what we're talking about around burnout, the main goal of this podcast was to get you thinking about whether you're falling into the trap of feeling like you need to do it all yourself, and whether you are a woman who is not asking for help enough, and what might be available to you if you actually asked for more help. And I know the answer to that. The answer to that is, if you asked for more help, you might actually be able to set aside some time to take care of yourself, which is the piece that is missing for all of us, especially anyone who is feeling like they're in burnout or approaching burnout. We're just terrible at taking care of ourselves, and it's taken a backseat during this pandemic, and we need to move it into the front seat again. We need to figure out how to do that. We talked about how to say no on another podcast episode. That's the first place to start. How to say no, stop saying yes to so many things. And then when it comes to all the things that you have said yes to, or you feel like you had to say yes to at one point, ask for help with those things. Stop trying to do all of those things yourself. And don't be afraid to do that, because I think what you're going to find is you have 2 big gifts that come from that. One, you're not as overwhelmed and exhausted because you're not doing everything by yourself anymore. And 2, the vulnerability that's required for you to actually reach out and ask for that help is going to come back to you in the form of increased and more meaningful connection with the people that you're asking for that help with.
That is so powerfully framed. Like, that was just a complete summary of
good. I was trying there. Thank you.
About. Amazing.
I was waiting to see. I was like, I have no idea if I actually got that right or not. So thank you for saying that. So, Bonita, thank you so much for being on today. It's been such an interesting conversation. I would love to talk to you more about the romantic love relationship stuff, because again, I'm definitely no love guru. So I think that would be an interesting conversation for a future podcast. But what do you have going on right now? And where can people find out more about you? Because you work globally, and you do, I think, the majority of your work online right now, right?
Yes, we work over Zoom like everyone else on planet Earth at
exactly.
this stage. But yes, I'm really on a mission to heal society one healthy relationship at a time. So I have an event that I host every 2 months. It's super valuable. It's a 6-hour workshop. Because I believe the relationship with self is most important, right, in healthy relationships. And then secondly, it's your love relationship. So it's really about all the soft skills that are required to step into healthy, lasting love. Because when we've got that bit covered, it sort of trickles down into all our other relationships.
Yeah. I agree with
So
that.
I'd love to invite your single ladies to that workshop. I'm sure we'll drop the link. I'm so sorry for all the ladies in relationships. I don't have anything for you. I work with single people at the moment, but that will change in the future.
No, that's okay. I almost broke into Beyonce there, but I held back. It was hard for me to hold back. And now I'm sitting on my hands if you're not watching the video version of the podcast, because I want to sing it, but I'm not going to sing it. I'm not going to do it. But for all the single ladies, this event, it's a great event. So I'll post the link. I'll include that, Bonita, in the show notes with this podcast. So if you're interested in learning more about that event, you can check the show notes to the podcast and we'll have a link in there. And when's the next event taking place?
It's the last weekend in May. So it's the 29th. I think it's a Saturday.
Okay. And if you're listening to the replay of this podcast and it's past May, you host these regularly every couple of months, right?
Yes, every couple of months. It's at the same link.
Perfect.
So I'd love to see you there. It's not the normal type of you sit and listen event, which is what I like about it. Mm-hmm. It's extremely interactive. There's a lot of hot seat coaching and we connect, right? There are breakout rooms and we realize that, wow, there are these other amazing women, strong, and they're experiencing the same things I am. And in that, we find closure. Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. If I was single, now I want to sing again. I would take the workshop. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Bonita. It's been really fun talking to you about this topic. And I look forward to maybe connecting again down the road.
Same here. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. If you've been putting yourself last for way too long and are worried that you're burning out, grab your free burnout checklist at www.wendymccallum.com/checklist. That's www.wendymccallum.com/checklist.